Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Hi there. Thank you so much for joining. We're just going to give just another minute for everyone to get started. Thank you so much for joining. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Looks like maybe we're slowing down on attendees joining, but we'll have some folks trickle in. So let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today, Boring Tiny Tools. First and foremost, you may notice that Benji de la Peña was supposed to be our moderator today. He's the CEO of SumC. He is down with a stomach bug. I hope he is feeling better, and I hope you'll be okay with me stepping in. I'm Hannah Wilson. I'm the Senior Director for Partnerships and Engagement at the Shared Use Mobility Center. If you're not familiar with SumC, we're an international nonprofit. Our mission is to connect and equip leaders transforming shared mobility. We do technical assistance for transit agencies and cities. You may know us from our research as well, and we hold convenings regularly for the industry. So you may have heard of our new Shared Mobility Summit happening in the fall, or Clean Mobility Forum, or our latest global convening for informal transportation in Bangkok in the fall as well. But let's get started on this webinar. I'm so excited to be joined by our three panelists. Before I introduce them, I just want to give a bit of context. This webinar came together quickly. If you're friends with Benji on LinkedIn, you would have seen him be very excited to get this going. So the context really was, at SumC, we're thinking about what are the kind of things that don't make the headlines always, the not sexy, the maybe not flashy AI tools. What are those boring, tiny tools that don't make headlines, but are actually solving real world problems and helping people get where they need to be? And so we wanted to bring together these three panelists, and I'm thankful we have them because I told them on our prep session that I am not really a huge tech person. I'm much more of an analog girl. So I'm excited to learn from them today. We have just a wealth of knowledge. So let me introduce them, and then we'll get into the panel discussion and open it up for questions. First, we have Bianca Wiley. Bianca is the Director of TNS Advisory. Bianca is a strategist that provides advice to organizations about using technology thoughtfully and intentionally. She's worked in the private sector technology industry at both startup and multinational scale, in the public sector as a professional facilitator, and in the nonprofit sector as a public interest technology advocate and policy expert. At least Benji has called her the Jane Jacobs of the smart city. So I'm excited to hear from her today. And next we have Boyd Reed. Boyd's the co-founder and CEO of HopIn Technologies and chair of the Brampton Board of Trade. Boyd is also an advisor of the Black Entrepreneurship Alliance and alumnus of both the DMZ and Techstars. Boyd is driven by a passion to help people get access to opportunity, whether it's through transportation with HopIn or through his community involvement. And last, with Kevin Chambers, who I've known for several years now, which is nice. Since 2000, Kevin has been helping public agencies and nonprofits ensure their technology investments serve their missions. Since 2018, he's been consulting as founder and principal of Full Path Transit Technology, focusing on effective technology at the intersection of public transportation, human services, and healthcare. So like I said, I'm really thrilled to have them. Today's agenda, first of all, thanks for dropping in, where you're coming in from. We're excited to have you all here. We're going to have Kevin, Boyd, and Bianca do some quick introductions to themselves and their work. And then we'll do some questions for them. And we'll have some time for Q&A. So we have some questions from, excuse me, the Zoom registration that we can get started with, but also please do drop in the Q&A function any questions that you have, and feel free to put in some comments in the chat. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Kevin to kick things off, and have him share a little bit more about his work and full path, and potentially proposal he's let us know he has maybe ready for you. So Kevin, I'll let you take it away.
Great. Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and be amongst this esteemed panel. And with apologies, I'm gonna talk for a little bit because I want to lay out some ideas that have come in my head. I mean, and this all kind of started off with uh, Benji on LinkedIn posting about this concept of boring tiny tools, and I think he tagged me in it in some way, and I linked with the things I'm doing, and it evolved into this panel, which is delightful. And since that time, this concept has been this is my joke I was saying earlier as we were prepping, is this topic has been living rent free in my head for like a month plus. So it's gotten me enthused. And so, with apologies, I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And then try to make it as quick as possible so we can get to the questions and conversations, which I think was where the meat will be. But I wanted to, if I can advance, here we go. So I'm gonna just, this is all coming from my perspective as somebody who's worked with small transit and small organizations for a long time, and really loves to tinker. But when I do this work professionally, I discipline my tinkerer side with my focus on mission, which is really effective and appropriate technology over hype, and very centrally organizational capacity building for small organizations. So just, be clear, I'm not trying to speak universally about everybody and everything, but rather about the niche that I work in, which is small transit. And I want to recognize that, the hype around AI and this is, I think this is, I've kind of seen this as connecting two things, which is building tools using AI. So I want to start off on the AI side, which is just to recognize that there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of reasonable concern about whether this technology will play out positively for everybody in society and within our industry. And I just want to recognize that we can't assume positive outcomes from technology. I think the last few years have really borne that out at a social and economic level. So my goal here is to present an idea, sort of a possible direction, where the people that I work with come out better and more resilient, that we come out as better people, and that we maximize what we can do without getting IT staff involved. At the most practical level, that maybe this talk can result in a way that if you have people getting on you about coming up with an AI strategy, maybe you can get out of that. So, um, so I want to start us off on the AI side with kind of what's actually going on in the software development world, which I don't think everybody is clued into, which is that AI really is upending the work of software development very thoroughly. And this is new. This really started late last year, that the large language models improved to a degree where they were really able to do a lot of things with less needing to be corrected and fixed. Um, and I think we're at a point where the job of software development will probably not be returning to what it was. And in high security areas, in particular, I don't think you can do programming without LLM involvement because they find security bugs better than people do. And this is all new. So when you hear about a lot of like consternation and concern and like, oh, big things are happening, a lot of it is because the best case for AI is in software development, and that case now is very strong. That doesn't mean it's going to be eating everybody's jobs up, but it does. This is just something to know. Um, and I want to read this quote from a software developer who posted this just a few in the last month. The title of his blog post was 8 Years of Wanting, 3 Months of Building with AI. And he says, when I was working on, this is kind of his general analysis of working with AI. And the context was he wanted to build this particular tool. He'd been wanting to do it for 8 years. He knew it was a big job, and he was able to get it done in 3 months with the aid of a large language model support. And he says, generally, when I was working on something that I already understood deeply, AI was excellent. When I was working on something that I could describe, but it didn't know, but I didn't yet know, AI was good, but required some care. And when I was working on something where I didn't even know what I wanted, AI was somewhere between unhelpful and harmful. Um, and then wrapping it up, he says AI is an incredible force multiplier for implementation, but it's a dangerous substitute for design. This really struck me as not only true specific to AI in my experience, but also sort of axiomatic about technology in general, so that you could kind of drop out the AI words and replace them with other things like nail guns. You know, nail guns are great if you know how to use it, but can't replace a blueprint. That consulting team, they were great when I knew what to tell them what to do. But when I didn't, they were somewhere between unhelpful and harmful. And then, having a consultant team to support you is a dangerous substitute if you don't know what you're doing and you don't have clear goals, right? So we're not leaving the world of common sense when we're using AI. So I just want to contextualize that because I think it's helpful for just thinking in general. And specific to AI in general, there's some real risks that AI can be opaque. We all have heard about it's prone to hallucinations, and there's really uncertain impacts at all scales on relying on it. The cognitive sciences about using AI, for a range of sessions is still just coming in, but is worrisome. And I don't want to ignore any of that, as well as sort of the economic and resource demands that AI is bringing right now. Um, but I do think that there is some use of AI around this idea of building tiny tools. So this idea, again, has been something I just have not been able to let go of. And so I wanted to like come up with my own working definition. Now, so this is the term came from Von Tan, who has a blog post about it. And I recommend everybody look at that. But this is kind of the criteria for my area that I wanted to present is, a tiny tool has a low cost of entry. It does not require IT staff involvement. It has high data security. What you make is easy to understand and document. It's readily testable by the people using it, which helps address kind of the hallucination side of things. It's built using standardized tools, things like HTML, things like JavaScript, um, and it's built. It accepts data in a standardized format and it produces data in a standardized format. So, and that means that it's chainable, right? You can connect tools together. And it doesn't require AI, right? But if you use it, you're using it as a consultant. You're bringing it in for a specific moment. Thank you for the link. Um, and if AI is it, you can bring it as a consultant, not employee. And I'll kind of work a little bit more with that metaphor later. Um, there are tools you can use today to build your own. Um, the tool that kind of got us talking is a thing that I made called Ride Sheet. It's built entirely in Google Sheets. I think it qualifies as kind of the larger end of a boring tiny tool. Excel has its own equivalents. Really, browsers now are capable of building tools uh, using static websites. So there's actually now local storage on browsers. So you could just build something with the support of an AI uh, tool, host it on GitHub, and then um, really there's no data that's leaving your computer because everything happens in the browser. And there's also notebook tools like Google Colab, Observable, and Marimo. We could talk more about those in the discussion time. But I want to present this idea that, like, um, in landscaping, there's this idea of gravity walls, basically retaining walls that are 4 feet or lower. They don't need engineering. You can go to Home Depot and you can just go buy a bunch of retaining wall blocks like Legos, stack them up, and you don't have to bring in a landscape architect. And that you can connect those. And I think this is the kind of the chaining idea, which is sort of the maximalist idea of boring tiny tools, is that you can link them together and you can get kind of a terracing effect, which is powerful. And again, is um, in an ideal world possible without bringing in IT staff. So that's kind of the most inspiring side of this as I sort of spun this out in my head. I think another inspiring idea is that we could have the idea of a BTT ecosystem where people are creating things, they're sharing them, people are building off of them. I want to point out a post by Chris Pangilinan, who I'm sure some of the people here know. Recently was working at MTA, the head of the paratransit service at the MTA in New York City. And he put this post out a couple months ago about how he built a geographic dashboard using the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission's publicly available data. So, um, and I talked with him recently. I asked if I could share this post, and he said absolutely. And one of the things he said is, he ended up using Claude to build this, and Claude not only helped him build it, but also helped walked him through the process of getting it hosted and up on a code repository, GitHub. Similarly, I have my tool, RideSheet, is also available publicly. It is free and open source. We sell hosting to it, but anyone could riff off this. And so I do think there's the possibility in the industry of building things, sharing them, inspiring each other, and solving problems together. So, and um, and I really want to like flesh out this that we can really distinguish how we use AI. I like the consultant model. I think it feels fits with my sort of aesthetic, for lack of a better term, where you have AI come in, it provides a deliverable that you or your staff can manage, and then it leaves. And part of that consultant model is what you would expect from a consultant general, that it also provides training, it provides documentation. It can go away, and then you can have people who understand it and manage it thereafter, or you can bring it in later again. And that is in contrast to other approaches to AI, which is, uh, you know, I think one of the terms that's coming out now is agentic AI, and that is often means like using AI every time you do something, right? The AI is sort of looking at your data directly, um, and and in the consultant model, the AI never needs to look at your data; it only looks at your problem, right? So there's a data security value there. That's basically it. I apologize for just running at the mouth so early into our conversation, but I wanted to get those thoughts out. Thank you. I'll
Thank you
stop
so much,
sharing.
Kevin. That was great. As someone in communications and branding, I love the metaphors that you're providing. I think it's just it really grounds the conversation and can help us talk about it in terms that we are all familiar with. And I really love that consultant. I saw Carlos in the chat mentioned that they call AI a very new intern. We also had that discussion. on our prep session. So great. Well, let me pass it to Boyd to introduce himself a little more and HopIn Technologies.
Great, thanks, Hannah. I'm going to share my screen here. And I slide my show remote here. Perfect. So thank you, everybody. We're happy to be here, be able to chat with you all here, answer questions, but also learn from you all as well. And thank you, Kevin, as well for that introduction. It sets this up really, really well. When you think about like Hopin being a great application of that boring tiny tool model, our goal is not to completely revolutionize everything to do with transportation, but it's designed to address particular problems. So we started this company about 7 years ago. I started with a good friend of mine, Eric Ko, known him for since high school, actually. And we set out to be able to address a transportation challenge. We wanted to have real impact on what we built and be driven by that and build something towards that. So when we think about impact relative to transportation, this is not new to anybody. It impacts where you work, health, your access to healthcare, your access to your loved ones, really everything. It's pretty much how do you get to that thing? When we decided to focus and zoom in on with HopIn was to start with it from a workforce lens. There is two practical reasons for this. One is that private sector is a little bit faster in terms of go to market and generating revenue versus the public sector. Additionally, as well, when we think about reoccurring models and reoccurring laying the foundation for transportation solutions, workforce is actually a really interesting place to start because when you think about the utilization of people going to work, you're going to work, ideally 5, even sometimes 7 days a week. The transportation is a little bit more predictable as well comparatively to other sectors as well. So our overall vision was not necessarily just to solve a workforce challenge, but we started there because from workforce you can then be able to support other supporting industries as well. If you have a shuttle that is running and helping people get to work, that same shuttle could help people get to a retail mall, or a same shuttle you'd be able to use to help get people to their healthcare appointments. But those individual trips and those one-off trips are not foundationally enough, strong enough to be able to build consistency around. So that's why we started from a workforce standpoint. So once we answered that question, our next question was logistics question, was how do we coordinate all these moving pieces together? And really, that's the only reason why neither the businesses or the transportation companies have really solved this problem. The businesses, they know where they are, they know their employees and where there are potential challenges that they're facing, but they don't know how to organize a transportation solution. That's not their business. Or some of the clients that we work with, food processing, UPS, Bombardier, like their main goal is not necessarily how do I get my employees to work. They have their main business. So, and then you have the transportation companies. You have these operators, whether it be, buses, charter bus companies, vans, Ubers, whatever it may be. They are not designed specifically to address this workforce challenge. So where we saw the opportunity with HopIn was to kind of sit in the middle between these three moving pieces, which is the businesses, the riders or the employees or the end users in this case, and the transportation operations. And here's our kind of initial unsexy solution, which is we know where they live. Through our platform, they'll be able to potentially leverage transit to get to a certain pickup spot. From there, that's where the gap is. And then from HopIn, being able to pick up from that pickup spot, bringing them into work. That was our very simple model that we look at solving this problem. So that's, referred to as micro transit, as last mile. That's initially where we started. And when we initially built this program, both myself and my co-founder, we are non-technical founders. So we had a very rough business where we had it all on Google Maps and Excel sheets and messaging people on WhatsApp. So I wish when we were building this company that a lot of the AI tools that exist today were around. Our MVP probably would have looked a lot sharper. But really, what it came down to was that, and the reason why we saw success early on is because we were solving a real problem for businesses. It was really addressing this barrier, making it easier for folks to get work, and they were patient with us until we actually were able to build out our products. So when we get to HopIn's platform as we are today, what we've been able to do with this platform is allow for businesses to not only build but manage transportation solutions in this platform here. We have a web dashboard and mobile apps as well. Our web dashboard is for the on the administrative side to help build these and manage these programs, while the mobile app is designed for the drivers who are our partners, again, bus companies, taxis, whatever it may be, can utilize it for route following their routes and boarding. And then on the rider side, we also have them ability to buy rides, book their rides, track their shuttles, see their schedules, all on this app here, and it's all communicated within. Within this platform itself, we've been able to leverage AI to help optimize everything for ourselves as well. When we think about optimizing from our particular platform, our platform uses AI and machine learning to analyze employees, where employees live, cluster demand, and generate optimized schedule routes and balance coverage, costs, and their rider experience. So simply put, we're able to look at where everybody's coming from, look at where people need to go, look at the transportation barriers and gaps, see where trans is able to support, and then with that, inject our transportation partners. So these are local, again, local partners, taxis, bus companies to help those people get to work. And it's still following, as much as our technology has improved, it's still following that very simple, unsexy solution, but just more refined now that our technology has grown. So, when we look at some of the case studies, there's two ones I want to highlight here. One is with our client, Maple Lodge Farms. They're located in Brampton. They're west of Toronto, up here in Canada. And with us, they initially started as a retention tool because they were having a hard time getting employees to work on their night shift. But it's actually evolved into a recruitment tool for them. So not only are they able to help retain people by making it easier for their employees to work, but as you can see here, some of the posts here, they're talking about how they've been able to overcome the transportation barriers. They actually designed the bus in their own branding. They use it as a recruitment tool because it's driving around town. But on a data level, what we've also been able to do is expand their hiring pool outside of Brampton. So with the shuttle services and the selected areas of where the shuttle actually stops, they've been able to increase their potential workforce population by over 500%. So it's not only, again, just a nice to have of getting people to work. There is very real business application and business opportunity by being able to bring people into work this way. The next case study I want to highlight is microtransit that we built in Northumberland County. Northumberland County is a rural community to the east of Toronto. And way that this built is, and I want to highlight here, is starting small and then scale. It started with a small solution that was designed around supporting the Northumberland manufacturing employees and their employers by connecting residential areas to industrial parks and running shuttles back and forth. But then what that was able to scale into is for the investment. And this is a picture of some of the local councilors, also with some of our provincial representation as well, that was able to invest into this program that actually built into a transit program that not only supported Northumberland Manufacturing Association, not only supporting employees, but then was able to scale out and support trips to the hospital, trips to work outside of Northumberland County, trips to the mall. So this was able to prove out our theory, which was if we are able to find consistency with the workforce, because that's predictability there, that same transit and same vehicle can then be used to service other transportation needs as well. So this is a great case study of showing how that scalability works. So my kind of proposal and put out there is that when it comes to transportation and addressing these things, it does take these born tiny tools to look at solving real problems. And tiny is a really good interesting point because you don't need to splash and solve all problems at once. It's about solving these multi problems, very similar to what Kevin mentioned as well, which is solving these problems small, seeing how they connect, and then bringing them together to be able to provide a more holistic transportation solution. And HopIn is a great example of how that's been able to work, not only from a workforce standpoint, but also a transit and public side as well. So that's it from me, and I'm looking forward to some of the questions later on as well.
Thank you so much, Boyd. That was really, really interesting and really exciting to hear those case studies and some of the results. I definitely want to dig into this concept of how things build and how they connect and also then where to start. in terms of AI. So let me kick it to Bianca to help us think a little bit broader about this.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Hannah. Thanks for having us. Kevin and Boyd, great setup. I'm excited to triangulate that a little bit. So, having started with tiny, I'm going to go global, big, not tiny for a minute, and roundabout way to get to the work that I do. So, one of the things that I think we feel culturally, or if we look maybe internet last 30 years, since the internet went mainstream, is a sense of inevitability around technology. And, I remember sometimes being someone who would say, like, it's not inevitable. We have agency, we have choice, and I still believe that. But I want to reframe it a little bit to say that as long as we live in a militarized world, technologies like AI are inevitable. And that's a connection that we just want to keep pinned to our conversation today, because sometimes when we just silo out and disaggregate technologies, we lose this grander arc of what we have to be responsible for and what we have to think about. And technologies developed in the context of conflict have certain characteristics. They're surveillant, often for reasons of violence. And those qualities, when you are working or building defense technologies, you don't have to have too much of a business model in the same way that we have to think about business models in civilian and public life. So I say that because often technologies are developed in the absence, and then they kind of leak into our world, and then we have to figure out what to do with them and how to ethically, responsibly use them and also deploy them in business. So that's there. Then another thing I just want to point out is that since well beyond the internet, there are people, and I tend to agree, that would argue that we've gone into being basically an only rational society, that the only way we make decisions is on the back of data and information. And those are important modes to make decisions, but they're not the only ones. And sometimes we have to make other kinds of decisions. And so I would also just caution us at this point in history to think about the fact that some of these technologies are really just accelerating super technocratic impulses. And I know talking to urban planners and transportation services, transportation operations, these are technocratic fields. And so I just want to offer that if we look again historically, long arc of tech, it tends to accelerate where there's disparities in justice or anything where there's power imbalance. So, and then even on a very practical term set, automating at this point in time in your operations, if you haven't looked at what your data is, do you even have what you need? Did you even design the data that you're about to feed into these models or automate? Those are all really important questions before we fast forward into use. So that's just some, like, as I said, would be like really up there, high level thoughts. But to bring this to the ground and to share a little bit about what I do, one of my favorite ways to summarize the point in time we're in is still from about the 60s, IBM, and the phrase in the sales team was, computers aren't bought, they're sold. If you think about that, and if you think about where we've been since then, technology, computing technology, information technology, the cloud, CRMs, AI, this is all supply side. So we're receiving these things and being asked to respond to them because they were developed and they were put out to the market. What I am trying to do these days in conversations like this is, if we acknowledge that the supply side is the dominant force here, if we just think that by staring at it, asking for better leaders, hoping it will be developed responsibly, whatever, we really give away a ton of our power, agency, and authority. So to me, the work from the ground is to think from the demand side, that if these tools and products are somewhat inevitable, our power really resides in decisions we make about using them, if we use them, how we use them, how we use them in context. And those questions, they're not really legal questions. So I have spent some good time in the last decade looking at what we're thinking about from legal, privacy, compliance, security, all of the general technocratic bouquet that we work in and beside. But there's a ton of cultural consequences, and I know that's an umbrella term. There are impacts to our relationships. And I think the example I'll end on to share how I'm working on this these days is to try to think about how we align the use of these technologies with our pre-existing organizational mandates or responsibilities. We have codes of ethics, we have codes of conduct. We don't have to rethink everything because these products are here. We have much more power in thinking about how we use them in service of those pre-existing things, because you're not going to get, here's a responsible AI, plug it in. This is not a productizable good. So we can't keep staring so narrowly into the product. I think we have to zoom out. And Kevin, I love that you brought up this sort of, I think they call it cognitive offloading or sort of reliance on computers or on data or on AI. And I'll just share this anecdote because I think some people here it might resonate. When I used to run public meetings, we would do written worksheets. So if we're having a discussion about an avenue study, we'd have, maybe 80 people, 8 people at a table, and I'd walk out with maybe 65 worksheets. And then I would take them and I would enter them into a computer, right? And this is not efficient by any means. But what happened when I did that was that I spent time with every person's input to that meeting that evening. And so, on one hand, that creates like a tacit sense of responsibility to the person, which I think is critical in relationships. So, yes, you could synthesize those notes, but you're not going to hold them in your body in the same way. But the more important piece, and this is kind of where my work is in strategy and thinking about technology, is that your authority gets messed with when you don't know really deeply what you're talking about. And I'm telling you that if there's one thing that slays the hype of AI, it's context. Because AI is engineered against context. So context is where there's power. You have power in your sector, you have power in your organization, in your role, in your relationships. And those are the kind of places where we can direct this stuff, I think, better and differently. Because I don't think the arc historically is that we've pushed enough from the demand side. There's just been a lot of ingesting, and I guess this is the way it is. And I feel for every public servant here who has to perform, oh, how am I using this? What am I doing? And kind of knowing over all these years of modernization, like half of it is just political performance because someone wanted you to say you were using AI. So, or whatever the last round of it was, big data, whatever, blockchain. Hopefully that wasn't part of your life. But in all of this, the question comes down to laws are not going to save you here. We've seen what privacy and compliance and security do. They're important, but they certainly haven't pushed us to making informed decisions for the most part in terms of the deployment, use, maintenance, and sunsetting sometimes of tools. Because I will close by telling you they break. So it's not, you don't want to build dependencies on things. When you're responsible for a production environment, you can at least go fix it. These are big, privately held infrastructures that a lot of the tools are modeled on that you don't have control over. So these are sort of pieces to keep in mind as we're both excited, but also, I think there's a lot of ways to merge the enthusiasm for the technology with the pre-existing knowledge, mandate, ethics, and responsibilities. So if organizations want to work on those things, that's what I enjoy doing. And it's great to be here to talk about this more together.
Thank you so much, Bianca. That was wonderful. And yeah, I love the themes of power and agency and authority. I think all three of you sort of touch on that in different ways. And I really want to dig into that. Also kind of the cultural and social side of what we do and how we really hold on to that. And while we're talking about leveraging and optimizing AI, how do we really understand what we're doing deeply? And as you both, Kevin and Bianca said, leverage AI, right? That's what we're here to talk about, to add to that knowledge. And I love that anecdote, Bianca, about sitting with the data, and really engaging with it still. So maybe good segue. I want to spend just a little bit of time focusing on this hype. There's so much hype. It is everywhere. We see it in the news. It's a shiny new object that, especially in the US, we love to grab onto. So I want to start for Kevin and Boyd. What got you interested in testing AI for your products? And was it part, was the hype part of it, or how did that play into it? And I think maybe for you, Boyd, specifically too, since you were someone who wasn't technical or super tech savvy rather, how did you, enter into it? And again, like, was hype part of that? And then Bianca, I've just got a little different question for you. But Kevin, do you want to start maybe?
Sure. I think it started for me because one of my roles as a consultant is to try to separate the wheat from the chaff in terms of the hype cycles and help agencies focus on what will actually advance their mission versus, just get them mired in, shiny objects. And so I felt a responsibility on that front to talk about it. And I gave a presentation, actually, I think it was in a state conference in Pennsylvania 2, 3 years back. And somebody asked about AI and how much they should be. And I'm like, don't pay attention to that. And I was like, just don't, step away. I think that was the correct answer at the time. And I think I definitely need to like um, temper everything I say with the fact that these are all provisional statements because the change is quite rapid. But yeah, it was really that needing to try to like help agencies not get distracted. And then secondarily, with my tool with RideSheet, which has software code behind it, um, as part of it is like wanting to see where it could help me and whether it could do things that made the tool work well and whether I could really use it and start to really like wrestle with the ethical side of it. How does this what are the costs and benefits, right? And I think the standard model for technology is to focus on the positives and and often oversell those positives, to the client, and then obscure or minimize the costs, which are often distributed, right? It's not the customer who's paying the costs often, right? It's others, it's the environment, it's the workers, it's there's a lot of sort of for me now sort of infamous stories of like where things were AI, but they were actually like, what was feeding the AI was workers across the world who were not being paid well to provide context and input, and into the data model that is behind those systems. So I continue to be of two minds about it. But kind of seeing where things are going strictly in software, it's like, well, I need to understand it.
Mhm.
Um, and it's like I say, in the last 6 months, we've passed the point where it's like I can kind of ignore it and do it my own way. So,
Mhm. Yeah, I appreciate those of you that feel like it's part of your role and responsibility to help educate the rest of us. So, yeah, thanks for that, Kevin. How about you, Boyd? How did you kind of get started?
Right. I think the limitation of my lack of technical ability caused me to slow down naturally. And because of our focus on our work, not that it's overly dire, but someone missing work is really important. That could cause them their job. So we really took into a precaution about anything that we applied. We wanted to make sure that it was going to accomplish what it did. And because we went from a non-technical way where a lot of the work, if not all of the work, was manual, it was more of a plug and play situation more so than like covering for things. So we were like, okay, the clustering algorithm that we utilize with our machine learning came from us understanding the logistical problem of coordinating all those pieces. So we just were like, how can we do this better? And it was the AI tools tend to be the result of that in more recent years. So because of that technical, it slowed us down. We had to think about, okay, how is this going to impact our ability to meet the needs of both our clients and our end user? But also at the same time, really what it came down from a scalability standpoint was really replacing. We joke about it internally. Is that in a lot of ways we want to have these tools be able and work ourselves out of a job relative to those more tedious and a longer tasks, so that we can focus on more on the QA and the more strategic application of these things, more so than focusing on how do we group people together by staring at a map. So for us, because of that lack of technical, it slowed us down a lot. But then the scalability of wanting to help more and more people pushed us to be able to continue to learn and be able to tap into tools that are available for us.
Mhm. Yeah, I know in our prep session you talked too about identifying, the problem first, and then what is the tool for that problem. And so, that's what I'm hearing from you here too. That maybe slowed you down, but ultimately helped to, solve the right problem, right, with the right tool. So, for you, Bianca, I know, the hype is familiar. We had kind of, the smart city was all about making cities more efficient and easier to manage with real-time data. But the hype and the PR behind AI is a little different. It can feel a little dangerous. We've kind of talked already a little bit about, threatening jobs and a security risk, and you've talked about too the threat when it's seen as just this, put upon us instead of kind of taking that agency. But what is your sense of kind of signal versus noise, and what else should we be paying attention to?
Yeah, the smart city example is a good one because for cities, when the big data wave happened and you had the reports, it's going to unlock 1.34 trillion in value. That's a made up number. But when that was hyping at full speed, I remember talking to different municipal employees, and they were like, yeah, we're awash in data. It's just not the data that we need. And I thought that was a very interesting example of both that condition of supply side. You're getting a whole bunch of surveillance stuff. You're getting private sector has way more because it's in a consumer frame. So just because the thing is there doesn't mean it's going to match the problem definition as we just talked about. And I think we know that. And I think what I'm hearing everyone talk about now is like, what's the workflow improvement? Like what's the pre-existing thing you were doing that now you can maybe do differently? And I think starting in operations always is like very helpful. A couple more points. One of them is that since I've been working with cities, governments in general, is that we need a piece of organizational design history here for a moment. When IT divisions, departments, however you've got them managed where you are, and I know sometimes you've got, some independent IT, some go by division or department or use, some are back office. When those departments were stood up in governments, they were responsible for things like, is your email working? Is your computer patched? Does your hall pass work? Is security, like hardware and very binary questions? Fast forward like 30 years. And I mean, I've listened to people that are CIOs, CTOs, now we're getting head data, like chief data officer, chief AI officer, getting asked to be responsible for way more than they were ever intentionally responsible for historically. And so that's a shift that's happened over decades. And I just like for people that are working in government organizations, it is wild because now we're in a challenge sometimes where the maximalists are IT, or they are the people who want to do all the cool, shiny things because their career is incentivized to do the next cool, shiny thing, both from a simple, sociological way, budgets. It's never good to get, to like maybe in some cases in different conditions, you want a smaller budget, but most times people are looking to expand them. And so that's another kind of structural thing where we have to figure out, and I think procurement is a very opportune site to engage differently, is to make sure that the subject matter experts are driving. Because as IT and AI is getting more and more that the product is like leaking into the operations of government, that's a power shift. And like the corporation will never be held accountable. It will end with the government. And so I think we have to be careful as to what kinds of decisions are getting wrapped up and bundled into products that are then potentially being, lobbied, sold to people in positions of authority that don't track to the actual accountability and governance structure of a municipality, region, or government. So this is where it's scary sometimes to be the sort of, what are we doing here exactly? But it's going to lead to two more things just to pay attention to. There's a book called How Big Things Get Done, and I'm sure some people here have read it, but it's like a study of like mega projects and sports, Olympics, constructions and subways. And the number one piece of advice here is to slow down at the beginning. And so the thing to do sometimes when you can feel that pressure and you don't want to be the one saying, what are we even doing, is to turn it all like, hey, of course we want to do our due diligence. Because you have to slow that speed because that this whole hype thing, it relies on speed.
Mm.
When there's not friction and when there's fear and when people don't want to look like they're the ones keeping people behind and I don't want to be a damper on productivity, all of those reasons that people go quiet, this stuff just goes faster. So that's a really important tactic to share is that asking good questions because it's a normal diligence procedure that you have to do. You don't have to know the answers to them. But sometimes it really matters to say, well, what are we going to do in this case, or how do I explain the decision? Because the last thing I'll say, which is Signal from Noise, another great book. Some people here have probably seen it. The AI Con, which is that's a very obviously critical title, but it's important because it's talking about the hype. And what the authors do in this book is they separate out very specifically that decision making is a separate important class of automation, which is different than the kinds of stuff, whether it's synthesizing, transcribing, grouping, analyzing, modeling, all of those are not decision making. You might make decisions on their back, but the point is that decision making is something you should be very careful about automating because that is where you're going to end up with shifts in relationship, responsibilities, accountabilities, and everything else. And if you can see that shape as different from other applications with Gen AI or um, classical or much more statistical stuff. I think for the most part, we're talking about Gen AI in a lot of cases. So decision making is critical. And when you hear people hyping up the idea that we can handle this agency to computers, for computers to do things as properly as like you're going to be held accountable, you'd have to write instructions to the degree that are so inefficient. Because I'm talking about fiduciary. I'm not talking
Mm-hmm.
about like, oh, if it's wrong, it's fine. Go take any training lesson from any of the big AI providers. You'll find somewhere in chapter 3 or 4, always, it's your problem. These are not warranted products. So you really have to think about where you want to turn your job into like checking and knowing if you're going to be held accountable for a decision, be very, very careful about automation. Like those are some thoughts on where to like separate from. And I'm seeing some great suggestions in the chat. And I will type the books that I referenced here, and I've got a few more. But yeah, those are loose blobs of, things to me that really stand out as important versus what's loud.
Thank you. Thank you, Bianca. That was super helpful. Additional kind of framing and thinking about what to focus on and what to watch, really. And I think, again, kind of a good segue to talking a little bit about, so, we've talked about, maybe you just mentioned, Bianca, the things that we maybe want to be wary of using AI for. But on the flip side, and this may be to Kevin and Boyd to start, first of all, like, is AI a competitive tool for small firms? And if it is, what would you say, are those top 5 issues that it really could help with in your segment of the mobility market? So again, flipping it over, like, what are the things, and we've touched a little bit on it, but what are the things that it really could help with, and you would encourage people to maybe start with first?
Boy, do you want to take it first?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a few different ones when you think about as both Bianca and Kevin made reference to around that process improvement. That's like the easiest application that you can be able to utilize, be able to cut down on time around that, particularly when it comes to the transportation sector specifically, though. What I find, and when I'm talking to not only the team internally, but when we talk to other stakeholders, whether it be clients or when we work directly with municipalities around this, is that the management of moving pieces tend to be the hardest challenge, and then capturing the right data is also the challenge as well. To Bianca's point, when you talk to municipalities, they have all kinds of data that they can just throw at you if you want, but a lot of times they're not capturing the right stuff. So when it looks at like the management of it and parsing through that kind of information, I think that's really the important part of that. And there's multiple tools that you can utilize to be able to at least start to understand that a little bit, and resources to be able to help to understand that. But I think the management side of things, I think is super important, because especially if you're working transit, you're working with hundreds, if not thousands, of riders or stakeholders around this. It's really important to have additional eyes that can analyze that information at a glance and provide reporting to you at a glance, so you can make more proactive decisions versus reactive. When we speak to municipalities around this, and other organizations, they always come back to the fact that when we ask questions, they don't have those answers. And it's not that we answer. You've seen my slides; they're very simple kind of approach that we like to take to things, but just because they just haven't organized in such a way. So being able to manage both the management of the transportation and the moving pieces, but then also the management of the data, I think is really, really important. I think that should be top of mind from an application process. And again, tons of tools that are out there to be able to help, at least at a starting point, to start understanding that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yep. I love the concept too, being proactive versus reactive and using AI in that way. Kevin, if you want to jump in?
Yeah. So, so the space that I operate in is a space that frankly doesn't have enough software, doesn't have enough technology, right? So just to like, like I'm working with senior centers, um, small operations, under 10 vehicles, working from spreadsheets, working from index cards, whiteboards, and have 5 vehicles, and really for a community that needs 15 or 20 or 25, right? Small growth if we're talking about an urban area, but we're talking about multiples of growth that need to happen and that need to move from systems that are ad hoc and paper based or paper adjacent based, and they need to figure out how to move to systems that really scale. And that work is critical to the communities that they operate in, and the technology to do that growth has been sort of gate kept behind a software gate where the functional software is designed for agencies that have 25 and larger vehicles, right? And so there's been a real kind of like, we can't get there from here sort of problem, of how do you go from 5 vehicles to 15 vehicles, without spending some sort of six-figure amount on software. And I think what AI provides, and this boring tiny tool idea provides, is the operational capability to not have to go through software vendors anymore. And one of the things that's happening in the industry is people are realizing that at the corporate level and kind of at all levels, that a lot of these software as a service company, these SaaS companies that have built their business on sort of providing these specific vertical industries with like, okay, here's the system, you buy our system and you go, and it's like, and all of those systems aren't very good. Like they don't map well to what people are actually doing. And I think what we can see now is that we can have basically close to free software to help those kinds of agencies grow, and not have to go through these for the size of the organization, very expensive pieces of software. And that even when they get them, aren't a good match, right?
Mhm.
Like, so we're talking about more like homemade software. And so we're kind of getting away from some of the ethical concerns, which I share, that Bianca said about like using AI for decision making. Like, I just want to run away from that. But really, what we're talking about in the space that I occupy is just helping them manage their data at all,
Mhm.
right? And being able to manage that data and tell their story through that data, right? Which is very difficult when you're just doing it with an ad hoc spreadsheet or a whiteboard or whatever. You can't do that very well. So I feel I have on these fronts that I'm specifically addressing, I'm feeling quite optimistic about the opportunities because again, it's using AI as consultant, not as decision maker or employee who's doing things in place of a person, right? So it's a different role and one that I think uh yeah, I'm actually excited about. So
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bianca.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, I haven't explicitly said a lot of the things that I'm talking about are sort of I don't want it all to go into the big tools, right? So this is sort of to say if, and we have to remember one of the wild differences with AI, Gen AI at least from technologies prior, software companies have always been able to push feature updates into your life. But now they're just sort of installing AI features into products where there's no gating, there's no procurement. There used to be like a tripwire that you'd buy something. And I'm sharing this because I only clocked this recently as to why some of this is so unsettling, is that when you would procure something in large organizations, that would set the tripwire for the organizational training, for the policy development, da 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 da. It's not happening like that. It's just popping up. People are using it, private devices, public devices. So in order to protect the space, to do what Boyd and Kevin are doing, you can't fill it with all the noise and then all the babysitting and the triple checking and turning your job into was the thing, or it's not even the right thing. And why did we do this? And now we have to rip it out because I think we're going to go through like an AI remediation phase of like, oh my God, what was that? Why did we do that? I don't know. The person who helped us do it isn't even here either. So now, like, this is not unreasonable to me that it might happen. But what Boyd and Kevin are talking about, this is why I love this whole organizing concept. Kevin, I'm so glad that it came together, is that this is context. So in context, everyone can be like, yes, that sounds right. Like, love a non-technical founder, Boyd, because it has to make sense, right? Like just period, without rationalizing it through product or the data is this, because I want to remind everyone, it can get so confusing when it's like, well, is it this? Is it that? Is it NIST standard X? Is it that? Did we do this? Like, did we audit it? Was it that? Where's the data from? And that's very busy work. That is different from, is it doing the thing? Like efficacy goes right to the back of the line somehow with technology. Is it doing the thing, or is this even the thing we need? Is like list 7, 8, 9. Because it starts with, is it privacy preserving? Yes, great, let's do it. It's like, hold the line. Just because it's privacy preserving does not mean it's a good idea. So we have to evolve our frames, and it's really going to happen well from the ground up. But if we don't protect the space to make, room, time, and frankly, budget to work with small, boring, tiny tools, we're going to have a problem because we already do not fund the maintenance of infrastructure investments properly. And so it's the same with software. And so, like, we don't do that well in the public sector, nor should we, because this isn't a product, that's not what the public sector does. So the analogy that I thought of recently is that this Gen AI being thrown everywhere, it's like someone giving you like a litter of kittens and then just running away, like, this is adorable. And then 8 hours later, it's like, what are we doing with this now? And all of the things that you then have to buy, do, support, keep on top of, all the changes you have to make just because someone dropped them off. Like, that's where we need to watch ourselves, because that is time, and that time is money, and that money could be deployed in different ways, and including in the people around the technology, not the technology itself. Because I think that's what we need to understand, is that in the budgets, you need money toward it, but you need it toward the people who are writing the requirements, doing adaptation, maintaining it, and helping manage a vendor. That is money that you want to spend on people's salaries, not on product license. That's how we need to start to shift the budgets in the public sector towards supporting this stuff in practice.
Yeah, that's really making me think about this also concept of trust. Like, there's so much trust that you need to have in the person that you're working with, in the product itself. And going back to what you said, Bianca, how are we funding that? Like, how do we have enough money to feel confident in our decision making and our processes to back up what we need and how we need it. I want to be mindful of the time and all of the great questions we have in the chat. So I think I might just end this panel before we open up to Q&A, maybe with just a question of, what's your best advice? We've talked about advice throughout this, but if there's anything else that you want to leave out there for folks, the best advice to people in firms, whether it's large or small transit agencies, startup, or established mobility companies that are tasked with investigating and implementing AI, how should they deal with it? What expectations should they set or manage? Then we'll get into some Q&A if anyone wants to start.
I'm happy to start with just a very quick one, which is something I've said a few times, which is just starting small. Get your feet wet. Do a little bit, especially if you haven't utilized AI before. Really, just not even AI, just technology or any tool specifically. Start small. See how it works. See how it doesn't work. See how you and your team collaborates and work with it, and then scale it up. It's really important to be able to do that. But starting small is not only a cautionary tale; it's also like to motivate as well. It's just like start small because you don't have to come in and change the world in one fell sweep. Sometimes it does take small incremental steps. You get a little bit more confident. You get a little bit of a pro around that. One example I like to use, although it's not AI, at the beginning of the pandemic, my mom struggled with just even like opening up a Zoom link, and then by a few months down the road, she was able to host like full sessions for Lupus Ontario sessions as well. And if she could do it, I'm just kidding. But the idea is that if you start small and you start to like be able to test with things, you get a little bit more confident, you get a little bit more knowledge, and it also motivates you just to be able to start. And that's really the most important thing from an application standpoint.
Thanks, Boyd.
Yeah, my head was going to come off with nodding at the start small. I will add two things. One, I'll put this in the chat. Again, this book's called The Culture of Technology, and it's really good because it's written in like the 80s, and good thinking is timeless. And this talks about considering all technologies as halfway technologies. So if you just think that this thing's coming at you half done, half thought out, half whatever, then you start to realize, oh, I have to have a response. I am responsible for this. It's not going to come fully formed with context, with knowledge, and start kind of spreading that thought around to people that you work with. I think it's really important. And the second thing is so basic, but one of my favorite technology thinkers, again, we'll go into the chat, name is Ursula Franklin. This was a series of lectures in 1989 called The Real World of Technology. She talks about a lot of things, but in work specifically, she talks about the difference between prescriptive and holistic technologies, with prescriptive being like, the computer says this is how it works. And if you're at the airport, you want to check a seat, and they say, oh, we don't have a seat for you anymore. And they say, wow, the computer told me. You can't do anything because the computer told you don't even have information. That's a prescriptive technology. Holistic technologies keep the agency for your work within your domain. So really think about these technologies as labor issues. Really, really important to just always think about them as labor issues and make it not scary where you work to talk about what's working, what's not. That's huge. And Ursula Franklin, the reason I thought of her is she was a Quaker. There's a practice in Quaker life called scrupling, where even if you don't know what you're going to do about a problem, you talk about it together. So I think that's like that causes friction in a good way, and it makes it less scary to say like I don't understand, because people start trainings with like LML, deep learning, sorry, LLM, deep learning. Like this is all set up to make it so we don't participate, and that's exactly the wrong thing to do. Is you need to participate. So anything you can do to help people feel confident that their subject matter knowledge, your transportation expertise matters more than anything that's coming flying in without your context. So be assertive with your knowledge.
Amazing. Thanks, Bianca. I need to be hearing all this. Thank you. Go ahead, Kevin.
Great. Well, I hardly support everything Boyd and Bianca have said. And I think just at a practical level, specific to interacting with these large language models, one thing is just to go back to these are tools. The marketing hype of are these things becoming conscious? Just let all of that go. Just drop all of that. These are tools like every other tool, and in the sense that kind of that quote from earlier in my presentation, think of them from what your mission is and what problems you're trying to solve and focus on that. And I think you should take into account that these are being um, really sort of pushed at us by large organizations that have their own interests. And, so I'm just going to put in the chat the sort of personal preference that I use with the large language models I use, and which is them that just have them not be friendly. So I have it adopt a Star Trek ship's computer persona, which is like straight to the point. I want to know things. I want to get those things back. Don't tell me how smart I am. Don't tell me how that was a great idea. Um, and the positive upside of this, which I love, is that often it will respond with affirmative, which I really like. Kind of fits my fits my aesthetic around interacting with computers. Um, so I think that that's a good start.
I love that. I love that so much. Well, let's move to the audience Q&A because we've got quite a few in here. I'm going to start just from the top for right now. And this first one is for Boyd and Kevin. Are there any concerns if in the future the costing models for AI change, and how would that impact the viability of your services? So I know, Bianca, you mentioned that, things change, people move, but the AI, product itself changes. So any response there?
I could just say, I mean, I think the industry and many industries have a history of being burned by things coming in cheap and then having those costs rise, right? And these investors wanted to get their 10x back, right? And I think that's a real risk, and that is one of the drivers behind this idea of taking a consulting model with AI rather than an employee model. So you come in, you build something with the AI, you learn from the AI, and so you come out with a tool that you don't need AI for, and you come out smarter because you've learned, in an ideal world, this is my jam, is like, I want the AI to show me how it did it. Well, show me where you did that thing. I want to see that. I want to see how did that code work. And it works for validation. It's good for testing, but it also just works because I come out better. Like, until a year ago, I mean, whenever I wanted to learn about how to deal with a specific code, I was going to Google and going to websites like Stack Overload to figure out how do I write this specific thing. Now I can get that much more quickly from AI, but then I have it and now it's mine, right? So I think that addresses part of that.
Yeah, and my answer, it's going to sound like I'm picking on my parents, but I have another test within our company it's called the Heron test. My dad doesn't have an email and he refuses to have an email. And part of the people that we service tend to not be, have reliable access to data, so they can't utilize our apps in the way that it's developed for and designed for in itself as well. So not even just the application of AI, we've been able to build in fail safes to if there's something that goes wrong with the technology we've put into place, that we could still be able to deliver on our promise of getting people to their final destination. And I think that's just a good practice, whether it is the way that we utilize our AI, which is around that clustering and the route building and the scheduling. If that no longer exists, or if it becomes too expensive, we have the ability to fall back on, although it's not scalable, to be able to solve this more manually until we figure out an alternative. So I think it is really important that the AI or the technology isn't the solution. It's the tool that helps you perform the solution.
Thanks, Boyd. A question for you, Bianca. You mentioned the power of demand, but how do we avoid the tragedy of the commons situation where unethical AI models or immoral use or data leakage can be a way of getting ahead?
So the Elinor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize in economics for her work on the commons, she's got an 8 set of principles for managing commons. And I'm not going to reel them off, but I'm going to suggest take a look because they're fantastic and transferable. But in this case, I think we come back to something, and I also saw Kat mention about when you can't collect data. There's a scholar named Ruha Benjamin. She's got this book called Race Against Technology, and she talks about the datafication of injustice. And I think what she asks is really like, how much data do we need to solve this problem? Because in a lot of cases, We don't need any more data to solve the problems we have. And I think we have to sometimes understand that we have to not pack all of the responsibility, the politics, the opportunities into technology, because that's just going to fail. So those things, to me, if we live in an environment of austerity, everything's underfunded, you can't avoid some of what's going to be depraved in a context where, even data, even during the time of big data, data is not something where you've got, a multinational with hundreds of billions of dollars of infrastructure being like, I've got the data, you can have it too. Like that's not the same thing. So these things aren't really like there's that funny word fungible. Like what the data is to you and what the data is to the other person is also not the same thing. So I think we need to try to park our important politics outside of technologies. And once we're funded properly, all these things become less dangerous. And I think that's what we have to remember is rather than thinking we can make them safe, we make each other safe by funding in our safety, by funding our safety. And I'm sorry to give the I think we all know what I'm saying, but sometimes I think we've kind of given up on root problem and now we're trying to solve it in the edge. And I don't think it is solvable. So I think the answer to both of these is sometimes that context, we can't ask so much of the technologies in politics. I think we have to do them around them.
Yeah.
And some things for everyone needs to know this across the whole political spectrum. Some things do not scale. I'm sorry. Context will just roast you there. Relationships don't scale. Relationships are inefficient. Some of them, we have to begin to accept that because that culture of humility is how we're going to get out of here. Because you cannot scale some of the things that people want to scale, even the best intentions. Some things do not scale.
Yep. Yeah. This is maybe tied in a little bit from Kristen Caffrey. I work on our innovation team and I'm quite skeptical of AI, but I'm trying to understand where it can be useful and where it can't. Every time I find a use, I also come against the inaccuracy that floats up. And when I think about the time I spend checking, verifying it, seems to me that time isn't worth it. Could the panelists talk through this complaint and help me think about this in another way or provide feedback resources on working through this? One way I'd love to use AI is in a closed loop system, uploading all of our survey data from the last 10 years to then ask questions like, how have rider experiences changed over time? Or what safety improvements are most important to riders?
Yeah, I would say to that, this is something that I've heard anecdotally from other colleagues in my field of agencies putting um, data into an LLM and asking questions, using that to interrogate the data. And I think that is risky because what, and this is kind of my take on the BTT idea is you use AI to build the tool to do the analysis. Like I want to do a particular analysis. This is what my data set looks like. These are this is what the CSV looks like. These are the headings. I want to build a tool that presents this data in the way, and I want you to write the formulas or the calculations or the SQL query that enables me to do that. Right. And that code is then yours. Again, we're going back to consultant model. It leaves after it's done. And that is testable. That code, that process that you've built with the support of the AI is testable. Whereas what the AI spits out with the code itself is not. That's going back to that opacity thing and the sort of the mercurial nature of AIs. I frankly just don't encourage that. I don't think that's the proper use of AI.
Anyone else want to add to that at all?
Yeah, I'll just say that I think some of the interesting uses are the things that you can't afford to do, like if it's market research or if it's questions that even if it's not exactly right, still might prompt interesting thought, and I think this is the difference between using it as more creative partner than something that has to have fidelity and accountability and responsibility. Because I agree, like checking work for me, I'd rather just do the work. And if I don't do the work myself, then I get nervous about how I'm explaining it or defending it. So I think sometimes we have to, like, it's counterintuitive, but like use these things in a creative, non-rational way is where you might actually open up some interesting pathways. But that's such hard time to come by in the first place. And I know that, and I don't want to pretend otherwise. But that's how for me at least, because I'm in the same boat of like, I'm working with these things. I use them all just to see what's going on because I have to. And I found that that's productive sometimes in an interesting way that's different than using it for something that I know how to do, but just try to do it faster.
Yeah. Yeah. And using it as a learning, again, as a consultant would, helping you learn along the way, maybe produce things that you can then test, as you said, Kevin. Um, let's see. So we've got two kind of concrete questions here. Are there other examples of boring tiny tools in transport that you can think of that we could create? And maybe tying this in also to how do you feel open source helps in creating boring tiny tools for transport, or any examples of good repositories to use?
Well, I think really because they're so quick to make, and especially for you working with open data, I mean, I think what this could mean for open source is particularly quite significant. I don't have outside of my own ride sheet repository, which is just on GitHub. I mean, I think if you just do a Google search for ride sheet, you'll find it. Um, I don't know of a lot, but I think we could kind of have an explosion of open source through this. And I'll just go back to the example of Chris Pangilinan that I mentioned earlier. He created this tool with Cloud Code, and then he got it hosted, and Cloud Code walked him through how to get it onto GitHub. And I don't know if he made it public or not. I don't think he mentioned that in his post, and I have forgotten to ask him that. But um, to like have non-technical people be walked through basically handheld on how to do this, I mean, raises a lot of possibilities. I feel like it's very early days and whether that will really come to pass and whether that could be sort of be socialized into something that like, oh, we're all kind of swapping tools like this. I don't know, but it's imaginable. It's easily imaginable.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I just want to put a bit of wet blanket on the open source stuff for a second, just because open source, like privacy, sometimes gets the like, oh, it's open source, it's good. And it's like, okay, it's open source.
Hmm.
And just to say it needs just as much maintenance as anything else. And I think that's where we
Mhm.
have to be really just thoughtful about the fact that that's sometimes the hardest thing to secure, and no politician likes cutting the ribbon on maintenance. Like this is a difficult thing to rally for. So I just, we get into that, we see the demo, we're excited, it's got all the right qualities, and then 6 weeks later, it's like, oh my God, what are we gonna do? So just to like, it's a balance. I would love to see the future you're describing, Kevin, because it's so possible and there's so much cool stuff to do. But getting that baseline support for maintenance part of the equation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
can I speak to that? Because I agree with that. Like that is something that as a technologist I say a lot. Like it's not about what you can build, it's about what you can maintain. And just psychologically, it's a lot more fun to build than to maintain. So so it's politically fun to cut ribbons and not politically fun to show that a pothole's gotten filled. Um, but I think, and this is where the tiny part is pivotal, right? Tiny things are more maintainable locally, right? You have a tiny tool that's for a specific, purpose built for a specific thing. It does that specific thing, and it's legible to the person who is using it, right? So the distance between the person using it and the talent or the knowledge to maintain it gets smaller, and that's where I think there's sort of this extra value that's possible and is where there's the potential for cutting software developers and IT people out of the loop. Of course, that creates a new dependency on the LLM itself, right? But it's I think that's the shift that I am observing.
Mhm. Oh,
Just
go ahead,
sorry,
Boyd.
just a quick point on that is there's a useful tool called Swagger, and when it comes to like
Yes.
open source, yeah, it's a great way to understand how people are utilizing open source. So the idea is it creates like a list of open source tools and then how they're interacting with each other. And I think that's also probably almost a better starting spot in a lot of ways, because then if you just look at each individual open source tool, you may be able to kind of get lost in how it's particularly being applied. But utilization of platforms like Swagger, you could potentially look at seeing how other people are combining them. And that could potentially give you at least a head start or thought on where to start and how you can build out a tool that be able to support your company.
Yeah. And I love this because I have to now keep going, which is what Kevin said about the accountability. And I think Boyd, as to where it's being used, this comes full circle to governance and accountability and responsibility. Because when, this is old school urbanism, the people, you have to show up face to face to people that you have to be accountable to and responsible for. And this is long-standing governance. So anything that shoves more of the supply chain locally is good. It's good for power rebalancing, it's good for agency, it's good for accountability. And all of those things have been the problems with big tech. So I want to really
Mhm.
just like reinforce what you both just said about this, because this is like strategically, that's the move. It just has to be funded, but it makes so much sense. And I'm so glad you both brought those points up about the localism and the use, right? Because then it's like, and I'm sure you can see who else is using it. You can have a community and have a conversation. That's great, which is very
Mhm.
different than trying to get support from a big tech vendor.
Mhm. You're all reminding me, one of my favorite essays is Maintenance and Care by Lauren Mattern. And it's like all about the physical maintenance, like rust and repair. And I mean, again, that's sort of my jam. And but it's how do we apply that? It's a problem in the physical world, and it's a problem, in the technology world. But how do we fund and care and kind of follow those problems to the core and connect and make that, connection smaller? Um, we've got just a couple minutes. I'm going to just ask, there's a question on trust, and trusting anything when with AI. And, that's out there everywhere. We see, concerns of fake people, fake businesses, fake apps.
Mhm.
So I just want to open it up for you guys, maybe as our last question, and maybe we don't need to be such downers. Maybe you can find a way to bring us back up at the end. Maybe Bianca, you could do that. But how do you gain the trust of people and your services, and differentiate yourselves? And that last bit for Kevin and Boyd.
I would just say that there's a paper that maybe I'll put in the chat. And I like that I should have a book club. I feel like it's always like there's so much more on all of this and it's been thought through many times. Um, Misinformation, for example, is not going to be solved with the technical approach, right? So I think a lot of the things about trust point us back to that point about the humility and some things don't scale and that you have to figure out how we're operating on a smaller scale and not expecting universalism. So that's, my thinking here is we are at a point in liberal democracies where I don't know that it's working, like I think if we look at the history, it's pretty hard to defend it. A lot of the ways that we practice those things aren't working. And so if we look to things like disability justice and we look to pluralism, we understand there's lots of different ways to do things and we should practice that and think about it and think about it small scale and expect that in the next, the next place over might be doing something totally different and that's fine. So I think like that for me, this is culture shift and trust is about getting the kinds of results and trust is like constantly earned. So how do you make sure that you end this idea that the tech should be an intermediary? Because I think to close with a really great thought from Ursula Franklin is that technological systems can eliminate and reduce reciprocity. And I think we have to be so careful
Mhm.
about that because that two-way street is how we can build relationship and build trust. So let's be very careful specifically where we put things and try to keep them out of like really important foundational relationships.
Thanks, Bianca.
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree that really it comes down, trust comes from relationships, and relationships should be the center. And I think a lot of projects that I've gotten involved with, I get involved in these transit coordination projects, and often what's happened in years past is those projects, they bring in technology. It's like, okay, we're going to use technology to get these trip requests moved from here to this direction, that direction, and what has happened is the technology and the technologists suck up all the oxygen. Um, they force decisions to be made too early. And then when you actually try to get it to work, it doesn't work. It needs a bunch of changes because people are finally getting their hands on it. And there's no money left over to actually like do the stuff of getting it to work for people. And I think there's a way in which these kinds of tools have the potential of putting relationships and communities at the center and the technology more off to the side.
Mm.
And I think it's still very early days. I can't state enough my own caution around the potential weaponization of AI in our society, to generate more isolation rather than less. But I think there is a pathway there where we can fit it in the right spots.
Thank you, Kevin. Boyd, you can bring us home.
Yeah, and the point I'll just make is on like kind of just when it comes down to trust, it's like how do you apply trust in other places in your life? And can you apply that in the same type of situation? Does trust come from you knowing a lot and researching? Then therefore go and research and do what you need to do. Is it familiarity? Then do you need to maybe connect with people who have also used the platform or use this piece of technology? Like take where you find your best source of trust building or be able to analyze trust and apply that in the same way. You don't have to inherently just trust something just because it's available. Like take it and trust your gut in that way, in a very unscientific way of answering that. And when it comes to that competitive advantage and what you have is taking that really comes from your unique experience and how you can and execute upon that. Right. So the tool can be given out to 10 different people and be utilized 10 different ways. And your way is the way that you need to be able to be certain of that you can trust in, and then you got to be confident as well. So if you're able to find trust in other things in your life, then you're going to be able to find trust in the technology that comes about it as well. Just have to be willing to put in the work to be confident about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Boyd. Thank you so much, Bianca and Kevin. I really appreciated this conversation. It was awesome to moderate and hearing in the chat. It was helpful for everyone else too. So really appreciate your expertise and your insights. And we will send the recording out to everyone and make sure we also send all these resources in the follow-up email so you have that. Thank you so much again to our panelists, and thanks everyone for showing up.
Thank you.
You all take care.
Bye-bye.